Hi, everyone, and welcome to Intelligence and Noise, the podcast from GSMA Intelligence, where we take a look at the week's work and what is becoming an increasingly hectic, busy, dare I say, interesting telco landscape, and try and sift through what's important versus what is noise, and maybe adding a little bit of insight along the way. We do this through the context of the GSMA's CEO newsletter that comes out every week, talking about what was chosen and why we think it's important, and maybe what was missing, and maybe what else you should be paying attention to. You may have noticed I'm usually here with my friend and colleague Tim, and I've got Pau Castells here. Hey, Pau.
Hello. Hi, Peter.
Pau is the chief economist here with GSMA Intelligence, and he's here in part because he shepherded the CEO newsletter last week, but he also shepherded one of the most lauded pieces of GSMA research in recent times that we're also going to talk about. So look forward to that. Stick around. So as I said, we don't have Tim here with us today, one of my favorite Canadians, alongside Celine Dion and Justin Bieber. But Tim is in Belize, and we assume he's in Belize on holiday and not fleeing the law. We're gonna assume that's the case until he's back. But in his honor, I've got my leaning forward here. I've got my three-eyed beaver hat on. And that's in honor of Tim, but also in honor of some news that hopefully will lead us into the rest of the story. So as always, I start with a bit of my own personal anecdote story, what I think is interesting. And this week, what caught my eye, the fact that Meta is building a data center, a 1 gigawatt data center in Canada, seems a bit maybe not the kind of thing that's newsworthy, but I think it's interesting for a few reasons, right? So, I mean, all the normal stats that you see for this kind of thing, right? 1 gigawatts of data, $9 billion, 2 to 3 years, taking place in Alberta. If you don't know your Canadian geography very well, that's out in the West. And, it's got the normal things you might expect from an announcement about a data center build in 2026. We're going to be good stewards of water resources. We're going to use this as an opportunity to ensure that we build out and we help upgrade the local power, the power grid, being built somewhere where you can actually build more power capabilities. All makes sense, right? What's missing, particularly interesting, is any mention of sovereignty, right? I mean, it's rare that when you see a cloud or a data center build or an edge build or anything else from a telco or a hyperscaler or anyone, that there's not some mention of sovereignty. And you can question why. Is this just because Meta doesn't care? Meta is just beginning to talk about a business model where they sell excess capacity. If they have it, is it because they don't have excess capacity? Right? They recognize that they need all the capacity they can get just to maybe take care of all the data on your smart glasses. Don't know, but it's a bit refreshing. At the same time, also a bit of a head scratcher of where Meta's strategy is there, because increasingly sovereignty is part of all of these discussions in terms of how we think about compute, how we think about services, which leads us, I think, Pau, into our first story. So the first story that did make it into the CEO newsletter, and folks who get the CEO newsletter will know this, is the EC action plan on cybersecurity and AI. The tagline is simply it's there to address the risks and harness the opportunities of AI in cybersecurity. That seems straightforward. Also seems pretty boring and straightforward to the point of, is there anything there? So is there anything there?
Yes. So as you said, Peter, I mean, it is a plan, and the announcement of a plan by the European Commission can be a bit vague, and actually that wasn't an exception. So it was a bit vague as an announcement. I think that going a bit beyond the vagueness of it, there are some interesting things that are probably worth calling out, and that's why it made it into the newsletter this week. Um, if anything, I think just the realization that AI is becoming, I guess, not just a solution for cybersecurity, but also a threat, and that's this dual faced challenge that we are facing with AI. This is, in my view, the sensible proposition by the European Commission. It doesn't involve regulation, at least not as set out in the plan. It's a combination of different initiatives to try and make the European Union more prepared for both these opportunities and to leverage them, but also for those challenges.
I mean, but so the interesting thing is, and I've seen a number of people sort of laud it or call out that there's no new regulation here, right? It's all about looking at past regulation, a plan to sort of leverage it. And if I look correctly, there's a whole lineup of other things that have been done already. The AI Act, the Cyber Resilience Act, the Digital Operational Resilience Act, the Cyber Solidarity Act. So it feels like there was a lot of other stuff done already. I mean, this is, I guess, just a plan to say let's use all those things and actually do something. Is that fair?
So I think this is probably the point where Europe is trying to not just regulate, but also build capabilities on AI. And that's why some of the initiatives here, if you are able to scratch a bit beyond the surface, might seem interesting, right? So for example, the idea to essentially try and make sure that Europe has access to the latest AI models. And we have all seen that some of the I guess stronger AI models are certainly not European based, and some of them actually might be also subject to ingerences by third countries, including the US, right? So the realization from the European Union, in this case the European Commission, that this is actually important and that letting, I guess, some of the cutting edge models outside of the reach of European businesses might be problematic. That's encouraging to see. Obviously, and that's, I guess, linked to the pseudo critique that we have made at the beginning, right? That this is a bit vague. Well, this actually is a good step in terms of recognizing that there are some challenges there. But then the question is, well, what the plan is proposing to do? That's not clear at this point.
So it does, and this is for those of you who are waiting for it. This is kind of where we get to that sovereignty discussion, right? Because it does bring out the idea that ultimately there is this risk or this recognition that it's a risk of how do we get access to the models. Clearly, if we're talking AI and cybersecurity, you know, we're all just coming off of the fact that European enterprises and companies maybe had access to Mythos, then didn't have access to Mythos, and then and for those of you who don't know, I'm talking about the Anthropic model that was going to be more powerful than anything and find all the vulnerabilities. And they pulled back access, and then the US government pulled back access, and a whole litany of things there. So I think it's clearly, right, this is happening at a time when you're going, okay, we get it, this is in the news. But I guess the question is, right, there's still, if this is out there, and we're not just talking about models, right? Models are important, but also just the servers, US servers, suppliers of those servers. Again, I just talked a bit about Meta, right? In the beginning here. You still have to negotiate access to that, right? I mean, so as much as much as this might be a unified like EU position to go, hey, this stuff is important, they still need to have access to that or somehow get access to those models, right? And this doesn't really necessarily address that.
No, absolutely. And I guess the interesting bit of developing a plan, and I'm sure we'll hear more about this plan and how it takes shape in the coming months, is that, as you say, that I don't think the plan is about digital sovereignty, but it clearly talks to that as an important and increasingly central aspect of not just connectivity, but I think just general policy from a cybersecurity perspective, from a competitiveness perspective, from an economic growth perspective as well, right? So this is where I think some of the, I guess, assets or the position of telco operators in Europe might potentially be able to leverage and increasingly play a more important role in this space, if anything, because they are already kind of regulated entities providing connectivity services, which can be considered to be increasingly critical national infrastructure. I think what the plan recognizes is that this is actually, the notion of networks, connectivity, but increasingly, cloud processing, AI. This all actually becomes an interconnected system of networks that they need to be secure, and the positioning of telco operators in this space, just by not just their ongoing provision of connectivity today, but also by some of them already have made moves into the cloud space, into edge computing. So this already talks towards a transition that we might see more, and obviously having a pan-European plan that is trying to navigate in the same direction can be something that benefits European telecom operators.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think it's an important way to look at this, right? Because one of the parts of the act is a blueprint for access to advanced models, and I think that goes a bit back to where we started, right? A blueprint for access feels a bit broad, right? Is a what does that look like? It doesn't assure you access to those models. It doesn't assure you access even to the server. So I think to your point, huge role, right? And it's a reminder that as telcos look at opportunities, as you said, you're seeing it probably with some of the most visible activities from DT, from Telefonica, and building out its edge and connecting that to sovereign solutions. Obviously, what you're seeing across Europe, huge role for telcos and how they play in this. So fingers crossed that this is more than just a plan, that we actually see those blueprints do something. But let's get to the second piece not chosen. And we've talked a bit about this in the past, but the second piece that wasn't chosen was some move on the telco front. SKT and KT in Korea announcing their own investments in AI and in cloud services. I think the big one, KT, was talking about 12 billion for a combination of networks, data centers, subsea cables, cyber security solutions over the next 5 years. Um, what I think is interesting here, right, and this is all linked to sort of capabilities and AI, because everything is linked to AI, is that almost half of that, just under half, was around networks, right? Meaning 5G advanced and 6G. And so you see this. Yes, there was some. I think it was just under a third on a data center, 1 gigawatt data center, 2.5 billion for cybersecurity, which they kind of have to do because there's obviously been some cybersecurity issues that we all know of that have been in the news in Korea. But I think it's interesting that almost half of that's being directly linked to 5G advanced and 6G, and this connection between AI and advanced networks. Um, is that, I mean, from your perspective, is that just sort of I know I have to invest in 6G at some point and I have to get ahead on 5G advanced, and so I might as well connect this to AI because then I'm giving myself a rationale? Or does that feel like there's some there?
So I do think that the Korean model, it has been a concerted effort from the government to bet, and actually not just bet, but take meaningful action towards connectivity and high-tech investments as a central part of their economic growth strategy. That's cannot be taken lightly, because it has actually been delivering significant results. We have the growth and development story of Korea is actually quite extraordinary, and digital technologies have played a significant part in it. So I do see this as the next chapter in that story. And maybe linking it to the previous discussion we were having as to the European plan for security in AI. Well, actually, that sort of looks more like a concerted, real plan with meaningful action already taking place. And yes, obviously, it leverages connectivity and advanced connectivity through 5G advanced and 5G SA. But that, nowadays, this cannot be disconnected, or it cannot be put forward as a meaningful strategy without actually investments in infrastructure that support AI, that support other aspects of the internet value chain, right? So I do see these as a good example, a bold example of a, I guess, government, private sector working hand in hand. Obviously, the Korean idiosyncrasies are different than the European ones. It's hard to see that model working exactly like that in Europe. But yeah, I mean that might be potentially one way forward.
And I think, and for those of you who think that we or suspect that we might just pick these randomly, my notes here at the end say almost exactly to what Pau said, which is might just seem like build up for the sake of build up, but definitely feels like it's more consequential than the EC's recommendations. So I think you do see an interesting balance here, right? Both are important. Both are talking about how we build out important capabilities for society, for digital services, but at least there's money here. We kind of know there's a roadmap. We kind of know what's going to take place, at least per the plan in Korea. And it's worth reminding, because I know we mentioned this, I believe, in the past. This does come on the heels of a $1 trillion dollar investment plan that was mentioned previously in Korea, which includes a lot of build-outs around AI and chipsets and robotics. And I think we mentioned sort of part of that was pushing out using these investments to meet other societal needs like driving manufacturing capabilities outside of the Seoul area. And so this is all part of, and that was actually the SKT story is part of that, right? SKT was looped in there as one of the companies that's going to help drive a 15 gigawatt data center build. 15 gigawatts seems like a lot. So I think we need to take all of these with a bit of a pinch of
Is it a
salt
lot? I don't
because we're
know. I
talking.
mean, I'm almost yeah, illiterate when it comes to energy consumption units.
That's a really good point. These numbers are, and we're going to get to that in the end because I think there's another interesting story of number. Come on, pal, you're chief economist. These numbers should, um,
Not chief
yeah.
energy
The-
scientist.
I've
Fortunately,
heard,
fortunately for GSMA.
I heard an example. I believe the example is somewhere. It's like roughly around 3 gigawatts, being a city the size of Los Angeles. So 15 feels like a lot.
Like five Los Angeles consuming at the same time. So yeah, that's a fair bit.
So that is a lot, which is, I guess, why they're all building their own capabilities. Yeah, so I think it's an interesting, definitely an interesting contrast here, right? Of both sort of looking at important things. Obviously, there's a cybersecurity angle in both of them. KT building out capabilities, the EC talking about them, but with actual numbers there, and of course the connection to 5G advanced and 6G. So yeah, let's see how that plays out. I think we have until, what is it? 2029 is when we're going to see the first stages of that build out from SKT in terms of the data centers. Hopefully by that point, they get those chipset memory factories online so that we can actually afford smartphones again at some point. But yes, so other things. This is now where we move to the on our minds and on the road section. This is the first one for Pau, so he doesn't know that this is the point where we sort of stop and we listen for the theme music that brings it in. We're still waiting for someone to send us the Willie Nelson inspired on the road again, combined with Always on My Mind theme song as we transition to this part of it. So send it in. Willie has said that he's okay with it. On our minds, I've got some recent sort of travel things, but And actually, let me start with that before I come to I'll bookend you, Pao. First thing I was going to say is last week did two interesting things. Kicked off the sales week here for the GSMA. As many of you probably know, the GSMA has many different commercial offers, which means we have a sales team. And for the last few years, I've joined them to kick off their sort of inspirational summer meetings where they do their planning to give them a view into the themes of what's going on. They keep asking me back for some reason. And then later in the week, went to an analyst event being held by Huawei. And what I was thinking was interesting is that, as always, and can't share too many of the details because some of the announcements are still upcoming. But as always, the Huawei presentation full of just impressive tech innovation, right? Particularly within the radio access network. Anyone who's been to MWC, anyone who's seen their booth, right? You could just, you know, you'd be familiar with that. What was interesting is, and where I saw a connection here is, you know, he had a lot of the other analysts in the room who, bless their hearts, sort of looked at this tech innovation and said, "This is interesting, but how are you selling this to operators? Like, what's the value? Like, how are you selling the value of the investment?" And from their perspective, hey, it's obvious. Look, if I'm talking about things that can deliver better efficiency, better capacity, that's. But sort of trying to make this explicit connection to how this will help them make money, I think is sometimes something that we all miss in selling tech innovation, which was, I bring it back to when I talked to our sales team about the trends that they should think of as important, right? B2B services, the renewal of B2C services, AI, the transition from 5G to 6G. Within each of those, there's a whole litany of sub things that are important, right? Sovereign AI, right? Or SA build outs, or as we think of consumer voice 2.0. But at the end, the one thing that matters is how am I going to make money from this? And it got to be a bit of cliche, like, look, hey, what's the most important aspect of all these themes that this, that, and at the end they're like, nope, clearly it's making money, right? Because we don't necessarily make the connection for operators. And I sort of saw that 2 days later at this analyst sort of going, hey, how you explaining how these cool tech innovations help operators make money? I mean, pow, that was a lot. So are you seeing that? I mean, from your perspective, do you think the industry does a good enough job actually explaining how you're going to make money from the tech innovation that they're always talking?
Well, so I think we are still a bit, as an industry, in the hangover of the 5G experience, which put all these challenges very much, black versus white, right? As in made them very, very, very clear. Because I think clearly the returns, or at least the revenue growth opportunities from 5G, the returns are a more complicated story because you also factor in there the cost side of things, and 5G is clearly a more efficient technology with in dealing with data growth than 4G was. So there are some cost savings there. But when it comes to the revenue growth opportunities and the use cases, which is, I think, the key element here, clearly 5G has not delivered the revenue growth opportunities that were talked about, right? Or at least not in a uniform and consistent way across many operators. So I do think, and I've seen increasingly these challenges coming to vendors as to, okay, we're talking now about 6G, so, and 5G advanced, but okay, but what's in it for me, and how I can see that this is a superior technology, but how do we actually turn that into a positive business opportunity and a positive investment case? Which I think is something that sometimes is absent from the standard making process in 3GPP, which is different companies bringing their technological innovations in, and through a complex process of discussions, technical meetings, consensus, it all gets built in. I think what we are now seeing from operators who are the ones actually then buying the equipment and delivering those to consumers is some of these challenges actually becoming a bit more apparent, which is, I think, a nice discipline to have, right? So it's not all about technology for the sake of it. There needs to be a business case, otherwise no investments will flow in.
And telcos don't have, I mean, I think it's also a reminder that, in the last couple episodes, we talked about things like smart glasses, right? And I think to some extent, telcos haven't had the luxury of throwing something out there and saying, "Well, we don't know it's going to make money yet, but let's give it some time." Right? Hey, let's it's the classic, Amazon. I'm going to spend money and just capture eyeballs, and I don't know how long I'm going to be losing money, but eventually I'll make money, right? Or you see that from sort of the hyperscalers of, okay, well, I'm losing money, but eventually this is going to pay off. And I think, I mean, to be fair, you saw the end of that, let's say, with Meta and the metaverse, right? At some point, shareholders are like, look, you're spending a lot of money on this thing. We don't know when you're going to actually make money. And they pulled back on that. But you can't there can't be this never ending uh, build it. And I think to be fair, right? There was a bit of that early on, as much as we had some clear ideas of how 5G could be monetized. There was also this, and I think you still see this, and I think it's a little bit worrying, right? So I think that it's interesting because you still hear some of this conversation of when we built out 4G, we didn't have the app economy, and 4G enabled the app economy, right? So you had to have the networks first, and then that gave birth to those things. And I think as much as we entered the 5G era with a view of, uh, hey, we kind of know there's B2B revenues, you still see a bit of this. Well, you got to build it, and then the apps can get on top of it. I think it's a reminder that if you're a telco who has shareholders, and you've got to earn some revenues to prove your value, then it's not always that easy. But speaking then of telcos and earning revenues, I was surprised when I was in the office this week, and everyone was talking about uh, lauding a recent piece of research that we did. I saw a number of operators who were on social media talking it up. I saw some sort of announcement from Vodafone about it, because we've been talking about this for a while, but we finally released the work on European competitiveness and POW. The short story is Europe isn't as consolidated as the rest of the world, and that's a problem. Is that the short is that the easy short story?
Yes, I think that's a pretty good 3-second summary, Peter. I think we can now all pack up and
Good.
go home. I think
Yeah, we can we can
the
we can
message
we can go. Well,
has been delivered.
what is the problem? I mean, you're a chief economist, but I remember from Econ 101, competition is good. Competition brings down prices. Competition is, it's what makes the world go round and improves things for consumers, which means clearly you're anti-consumer if you're saying that we need less competition, right?
Yes, so certainly competition is a good thing. However, what's been happening in European markets in particular, not just in Europe, but in European markets, that's been particularly more important because of the very low levels of concentration that we have in European markets, is that especially as some of these new opportunities like 5G have not really delivered this revenue growth that we were all expecting, we have seen revenues per user coming down. Costs have been sustained, and that's been squeezing margins to the point that both the capacity to undertake investments, which in this case actually generate not just better quality networks, faster access to new innovations, but also lower prices in the long term because new technologies are delivering data more cheaply. So what's been happening is that in markets with lots of operators, the average scale of each operator has become a lot smaller. And that's come head to head with a basic question of this sector, which is that fixed costs are very substantive. Right? So you need to deploy for each operator, you need a fixed network that covers the whole of the country. You can, of course, come into network sharing agreements here and there, but you still need a very significant infrastructure. So in this context of declining revenues per user and with the same costs. One logical solution to keep on being able to sustain investments is to increase the number of users that you are sharing those fixed costs among. And one way to do that is through consolidation, right? So we have seen in the last 10 years or so, in pretty much all the regions of the world, an increase in the average scale of operators. And that's come either through mergers or through some operators going bust because they didn't have the necessary scale, which actually has been able to, in most cases, to rebalance this sort of, yes, competitive pressure is good, but at the same time, if you don't have the necessary strength in terms of being able to have the scale, then you're not able to invest, right? So you might have lots of competition, lots of different players, but none which is able to or is actually incentivized to undertake investments, which is not good for consumer.
So in my simple view, right? Whenever we have something that is particularly this complex, right? Um, Whenever we have something that's this well received, and it might seem like a joke, but honestly, right? Got in the office, heard from my boss, heard from various folks. Hey, everyone's talking about. They said this was really, really well done, really well received. Again, European operators, not surprisingly, on social media talking it up. A lot of times it comes down to like conveying that story fairly clearly. Right? It's a 40-some page report, lots and lots of charts, but I think two help to make the story if from my perspective. And I think one's fairly easy to understand. I think one we may need your help on. One is just a map of the world showing countries where we've had fewer operators or more operators or the same. And you see in most of the rest of the world, it's either the same or fewer operators, whereas you don't see that same thing in Europe, right? That's a fairly put it together fairly clearly made the message. The other is the U-shaped curve that I think it tries to convey the value of investment and competition, and I think it does it once you understand it. But it's a fairly nuanced concept. Maybe you can, and I think was it chart 11, 12, I forget what it is. So it comes in the earlier part, but maybe put a bit of context around that. And
Yeah,
everyone's
of
because
course.
everyone's going to be looking at this and they're going to go straight to that chart and try and understand it.
So that chart, what it shows in essence is that there is and it goes back to this discussion we were just having, right? So having more players competing, that can be positive to the extent that it generates competitive pressure. So one way to actually escape that competition or to get better is to invest, right? So if you are a monopoly, you have no incentives to invest, right? So if you introduce another player, then actually that starts to create that competitive pressure. And, I need to get better to capture market share. So your investments go up with the number of players. But that reaches a point where, again, this competitive pressure has taken away so much revenues that there is no money left to invest. And therefore, you have players that are not capable of investing. And at the same time, if you're not actually, it's not just about the capability to invest, it's also about the incentives to invest, right? Because if you are not expecting to be making that much money, then probably you're not going to invest that quickly, or you're not going to be as risky with your investments, right? And we're talking
Yeah,
about
your
this
planned return on
mentality.
investment. Your planned return on investment isn't that great, so why would you do it?
Exactly. So what the report brings to light is that Europe has clearly had a 5G problem, as in 5G networks in Europe, objectively, they don't have the same functionality, they don't have the same speeds, they don't even have the same coverage, if you look at the average coverage per operator, than comparable markets outside of Europe. That's a fact. And at the same time, as we have this 5G problem in Europe, we also have this other aspect where Europe is quite different, which is when it comes to the average scale of operators, right? Clearly, the average scale of a European operator is smaller than of comparable markets. So what the study does is basically just ask this question, right? Are these two things related? Do we have a 5G lag in Europe? because of the fact that European markets don't have the right scale to undertake the investments that lead to new technologies. And the answer is, and we will not go through all the detailed analysis here, but what the analysis shows is that, in fact, markets in Europe that have moved towards having greater scale in this period, they tend to invest more per operator, up to 50% more. They tend to deliver better speeds for their users, to 25% faster speeds, and all of that essentially at similar or comparable prices, right? So there's like a faster investment, better quality networks, faster access to new technologies at the same price, which from a consumer welfare perspective is net positive, right?
Now, I saw you on Wednesday in the office, so I know you made it out alive, but you presented this on Tuesday. We launched it on Tuesday
Yeah. So
in
on
Brussels.
Tuesday I was in Brussels, and we hosted a breakfast session, Chatham House rules. So I cannot share publicly what was
What
discussed,
happens?
but
Can I ask what happens if you break Chatham House rules? Is there like a
I'm not
Chatham
going to
guard that
I'm not
is
going to
it?
risk it.
Like I
There's a
often wonder. I
Mr.
get like
Chatham comes around and punishes you for it.
the four horsemen of the Chatham House come
Yes.
and well, please don't risk it. We don't want to. Our integrity is important.
No, exactly. So we had participants from the European Union, from the telecom industry, Europe, academia. A very good session, lively discussion, where yes, presented the findings of the study and then had a good discussion as to what these findings mean in the context of European telco markets more broadly, from a competitiveness perspective. Also, all of this obviously links into the ongoing review of the merger guidelines that the European Union is currently considering. So yeah, it was a very, very good discussion, and obviously we hope that this input can serve to inform these decisions going forward.
And I know I joked a bit early on that we've been talking about this for a while, but we've known some of these findings for a while. At least it's been several months, and it's like give some context. What happens between those initial findings and where we got to, right? I mean, it's fair to say that once you have sort of the direction of travel where you need to go, a lot of extra work takes place in terms of actually making sure that we have the story correct, right? So that it's not just a back of the envelope. We think this is a thing, throw it out there.
Absolutely. So we do obviously take our jobs as researchers and analysts very, very seriously, right? So in this case, what we have had for a number of months, and that's, one only needs to look at the trends, is that there is a significant difference in the behavior of markets in Europe that have, say, 3 players versus markets in Europe that have 4 players. So markets in Europe with 3 players, they tend to have, again, faster speeds. They have more investments going for connection, and so on and so forth. That's not good enough, right? From a, I guess, economic research perspective, because there can be confounding reasons as to why markets that are more concentrated tend to have these better results and better performance. So what we undertook to do, and that's what we did in the last few months, is combine this trend analysis with a lot deeper econometric research that tries to unpick and isolate the effects of, in this case, scale on these key market outcomes, right? So that we can have some reasonable confidence when actually saying, look, it is important to increase scale because this will lead to better outcomes. And we are not just saying that in this report on the back of some trend analysis. We actually have robust econometric analysis that has looked at changes in market concentration, how they impact investments while controlling for other factors. We have looked at events of consolidation versus events of market entry, and with, again, sophisticated difference in differences techniques, try to isolate and understand the effect of those. And after having done all that, one thing I can say, which actually adds to the confidence that we can have in the findings, is that all the results of trend analysis, econometric analysis, difference in difference analysis, looking at it with one metric, with another metric, all of them point in the same direction, which is what I think actually is remarkable of the study, right? That in
And
the
not to
5G period.
not to argue with the how serious we take our work or not, but I mean, if nothing else, you mentioned merger guidelines. We've seen the response from European operators sort of talking about this. I don't want to put too fine a point out to say this is high stakes, but this is not. It's one thing if you're writing an interesting think piece about a particular trend, and maybe you're trying to throw something out there for discussion, right? There's a lot at stake here, right? So we have to get it right, or as right as we can, which is why you need to have all of that data and everything to back it up.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Uh, Last thing before we call it a day, and you know what? Depending upon, I think some of you may be lucky because depending upon decision and what we produce this next week, Pal might be back next week. Talk about another interesting piece of research that comes out. So tune in next week for that. But I just wanted to flag one last thing. I think what I thought was interesting, and for folks to go and check out this week, is that a few weeks back we talked about some of the initial details coming out of our friend Elon's mind about what they plan to do at SpaceX in terms of AI data centers. We saw a little bit more details on that. So there's a brand now about that. It's called Starmind. If you go and Google Starmind, don't click the first link that you get. Not because it's not safe for work, but that because it's an actual company that existed before, I guess, called Starmind. So you'll be confused for a while trying to figure out what it is. You want the one that's SpaceX related, and it's interesting because I think it's actually it's really interesting to look at. We talked a bit about when some of the first details came out about what their satellites would look like. They now have renders of these. They have all the details, which I think do match to what we mentioned before, i.e., things about 20 meters high, 70-meter wingspan. So that's around 230 feet, which means these things will be huge. They are not going to be small. Some interesting renders of what the thermal radiators look like. No discussion of actually how they radiate in a vacuum, just the fact that there are redundant pumped loops on 110 square meters of deployable liquid radiator. So all the cool words that make you seem like that make you think that this will work. So go check it out. I think we're all interested to see how this all plays together. Perhaps the most interesting part, at least for me, and we're always looking for any input here, is just also a vision of how this all fits with the broader integration story, right? Of how you've got user terminals and the solar cells and the chipsets and everything's going to end up being manufactured and pulled together by one at one facility. So really not hiding from and really playing up the vertical integration side of the story because maybe the industry likes to fight integration on some fronts and telcos have to explain why integration is okay, but um, other people get 20 some trillion dollar dams by playing up the role of integration. So good for them. Pow, any last thoughts before we jump off and let people get on with their lives?
No, I think it's a pleasure to be here, and yeah, hope to be back soon again.
Well, I think you may get that wish depending upon what we put out next week. Thank you all once again for tuning in. As always, please send us your thoughts. Please rate this so that people tune in. And until next week, thanks again.